Good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
So I've got a great joy today. A month or two ago, you said, I wish to be challenged more. And partly because you and I agree on a lot of stuff. You're mostly libertarian or semi-libertarian. I'm mostly libertarian. I'm no longer Republican. You still are. You're really thoughtful. I'm only occasionally thoughtful. So we disagree on some things. But in general theory, we agree on a lot. And you asked to be challenged more by some intellectuals. So, Patty, Professor Limerick, do you know Alex Cranberg by chance?
I don't think I do, or maybe I do. In cluttered mind, I know
Yeah,
many people, and they.
I'm sure you've met him at some point. He's fairly influential in
Edmund Burke
Colorado now.
Society, sort of a little bit of these natural law conservatives, if you
Yeah.
know that crew. The uh, he's affiliated with a lot of those groups.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's done very well in his life and career. And anyway, he and the professor and I probably disagree on quite a lot. So we had him on a couple of weeks ago. We don't anticipate you challenging us as much as Alex Cranberg probably, but who knows? To be frank, Professor, I don't know your politics really well. I know of your renown. I know of your stature. I know of your good spirit. I know of your positive reputation. I know of your fun soul. I know all sorts of stuff about you. I think you're one of Colorado's best, and to have a chance to spend a little time, and people can look up on your resume however they wish to. Heck, you have your own Wikipedia entry. I mean, that's cool. I don't
Oh,
have one of
good.
those.
Oh
Yeah,
boy,
but
what a
yeah, I mean, by the way, what is a degree in
study.
American? What is that from Yale? What is
Well,
that?
from Yale, well, from anywhere, I suppose a degree in American Studies has a bedrock meaning that you couldn't decide whether you wanted to study literature or history, and so you thought, why not both? And maybe art history, and maybe 100 other things. So let's say that you were failing as a narrow specialist,
Ah, gotcha. So
which
you
I
are a historian, though, correct?
Yes, because then you reach a fork in the road getting out of graduate school. You have to fill out forms and send in applications, and you have to say whether you're basically you really have to say you're applying to a history department or an English department. And I knew I did not want to spend my life wandering and bumping around in Nathaniel Hawthorne's mind. I did. I'm glad I read a lot of Nathaniel Hawthorne, but I needed to be out of his mind and Melville's and a bunch of others too. And I'm glad I lived in their minds for a while, but I'm happy I chose. Well, that's what Norman Mailer said in a book once: God writes the best stories. And I prefer, if I'm going to wander around trying to figure out the meaning of things, I would rather be trying with, I guess we'll just say, God stories. I'm not sure that's what I'm
Ah,
supposed to say as a member of a state university. Maybe not supposed to say that, don't know. But I just, real stories, actual stories are much more worth exerting our mental energies while we're alive on those.
on real people and real things. I love that. So you're a historian. You for a while, I think it was a couple of years, you were a Colorado State historian. And then you were the founder of the Center for American West. Is that it? American
Well,
West?
we put a lot of time into prepositions, as it turned out. And one reason I'm glad that it is kind of, well, sinking now. We said center of the American West. So I cannot tell you the number of human hours that we spent with people saying center for the American West and us saying, oh, no, actually, that's center of the American West. And if you ever find yourself in a position where you're spending lots of hours on a preposition, you need to get out. And so I'm kind of glad that the university more or less took that organization down because that was too much time with of, not for.
I love that. But it was a couple decades worth of great work, though, correct?
I think it was a wonderful organization, whatever its prepositional troubles might have been. It did the Lord's work. I think, oh, good Lord, I'm really going over the edge here. Anyway, the Lord's work, I'll stick with that. And in fact, one of the reasons you don't know my political position, I'm not sure if I'm jumping too far ahead. I'm getting to this point, but I had been, my parents were both supporters of Democrats. My mother was a Republican, but never remembered that when she voted. So uh, and my father was a lapsed Mormon, which might say something about his angle. So I was raised in quite a liberal household, I guess. And then I went to college, then I went to graduate school, and then I was an assistant professor. And somewhere in that journey, I started to think, I go to dinner parties and everybody says what I was about to say. So this is becoming a little tedious because I can say I can say it for myself, or I can just say, well, now I really don't seem to know what to say because they already said it. So that boredom is the worst thing on the planet. If you ask me, it can be really, well, it's not really the worst thing on the planet, but it's a really bad thing. And I can't take it. So after a long phase, I just thought, this is really becoming, well, I guess I don't know if I used the term echo chamber then, but I just thought this has got to change. So, and I do have a temperament of trying to bring things together, I guess. So the Study of the American West became relentlessly bipartisan, and I did all sorts of things that brought people together who ordinarily would not be together. I had a series on the Secretaries of the Interior. I brought all of those because an historian cannot say, I shall only choose the secretaries to bring to Boulder who are compatible with what I thought at the time. So I could not do that. And in fact, as a culmination, I'm the only person on the planet to have ever brought former Secretary Stuart Udall for 3 days of company with former Secretary of the Interior, James Watt. So, and
Wow.
when you're going to the airport and you're going to pick up Jim Watt and Stuart Udall at the airport, you have a moment of thinking, whose idea was this? And then you have to say, oh, actually, that was my idea.
I
But
love that.
that was a journey. That was quite a journey. So for those purposes, coming to the point finally here, it just seemed right for me as faculty director of the Center of the American West not to endorse candidates, not to support ballot initiatives. And there were so many issues, like, as you know, hydraulic fracturing was something I was in that world for a while. So many situations with opposed groups shouting, and hardly anyone who thought it would be fun to be in the middle on that. So you don't know my political positions, partly because I fraternized across so many borders and boundaries that I would be hard put to be a purist or a clear holder of a position, because I spent too much time either in the right company or the wrong company, depending on partisan.
Perspective. Well, your reputation is sterling, and I know there was some controversy a couple of years ago that we probably don't need to get into, but you're welcome to if you wish. But the bottom line is, even with that blip in your life, you have a wonderful,
Oh,
wonderful persona and
well,
wonderful reputation and wonderful being about you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for doing what you've done for Colorado and the West.
thank you. Thank you.
So, Professor Tootle is likely the preeminent practical scholar of conservative public policy in America. I
Oh,
know there's the Heritage Foundation and there's American Enterprise Institute where we met. I know there's some Cato is one I'm a friend of, but there's a lot of good people out there. But as far as a practicing PhD professor who really cares about public policy, there was really none finer. Yeah, I know there's some people with
okay.
more degrees from Yale and Harvard and Stanford and all that stuff. But the
But we
bottom
must
line is,
forgive them. I'm just going to interrupt. We'll forgive those people who have all the degrees from Yale and Harvard. We just are going to be tolerant and forgiving of them. Okay. Okay.
thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. And most important, he's just a really decent guy. If you look at his resume, not his resume, but if you look at his Facebook post page, which you're not on much, but he says he's just a sinner in a world of sin. That's his one line.
My
Keeping
bio.
on the religious theme, you'll say God a lot and he'll say sin a lot. So, Professor, why don't you ask Professor Limerick some broad swath question or theme to begin with, and then she'll
Yeah.
either like it or not, or I'll interrupt or I won't.
Well, I guess the question I'd always wanted to ask you is, and you can answer any of the, I'll ask you like three and you can
Okay.
choose to answer any of these, but I've always wanted to ask you how you conceive of the West,
Oh,
what is unique about the West, and if there are any characteristics that are maybe not exclusive to Westerners, but if they're if what it's almost like if you talk to somebody, what does it mean to be a Westerner? We can conjure up some image and maybe some characteristics, but um, as somebody who's really studied it, how many of those things hold up, and how many of those stereotypes need to fall away?
And Professor Limerick, if somehow you could work in the novella Shane in
oh.
your answer, I would appreciate it because that's my view of the West.
Okay.
Philip, and the movie is fair game too, right? I don't just have to do the novel. I can do
Yeah.
the. Okay. Well, sure. That is like falling downstairs. That is really easy to bring in Shane for that question. Okay, so I shall, boy, will I try to be concise on this. I grew up in Southern California, which is not thought to be anything but a parasitical attachment to the continent by many people in the interior West. But it was
Whereabouts in Southern California?
in California on the edge of the desert
Oh,
between.
Banning, right? Yeah, Banning is that's a western part of California. I mean, that's desert.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very unique in the state.
It was very, you were very unique for recognizing the name Banning. I mean, nobody, unless their car broke down, then they knew Banning. But
I'm
otherwise,
from the Central Valley, so
okay, great.
I'm pretty
Well, that's
familiar
okay.
with most of the state.
Well, okay, so I went to college and we didn't really study the West. There, we didn't have any Western historians. That would be one reason. And then I went to graduate school, and we did have actually a very wealthy man had made this possible. William Robertson Coe, an oil guy in Wyoming, had given a lot of money. He was a Yalie. He'd given a lot of money to Yale for incredible collection of rare books and documents, and also a professor. So Yale, ironically, turned out to be a center of Western American studies. Okay, so we studied what Western America, but I don't know that anyone ever told us what it was that Western America was, so we didn't really get too far on that. I think it meant, at that time, it mostly meant the westward moving frontier. So, okay, so then I got a job at Harvard. That's even worse, I suppose, from some points of view that happened. But there I was at Harvard, and there had been no Western history taught at Harvard for, close to 25 years ago, I guess. And the person who had been there had been the leading historian years before, Frederick Jackson Turner, Frontier. Anyway, so I was in a pretty cool position to say, well, maybe I have a thought or two here that I could put out into the world. And I'm not sure that I then put much time into it, but I decided that the West for me was going to be probably the Trans-Mississippi West, and it would go from the middle of the country to the Pacific coast, and it would be arid. I would recognize its aridity, which meant that I was in a troubled relationship with the Pacific Northwest. Uh-oh, too much rain. Oh no, what to do with that? So, but I had 8 or 9 things that public lands, the majority of the public lands, the majority of the Indian population, the sometimes, well, too often seen as the dumping ground where you could put nuclear waste or troubling human populations and so on. So I had some very good definitions of the West, and they were quite clear to me, but I was still tormented for many years by people who couldn't, I guess they don't, well, they really cared. They would say to me, where is the West? When you say West, wasn't it once west of Plymouth and Plantation? Oh, yeah, but that's not the one I'm talking about. I believe I was right to think that the West that I was thinking of, the Trans-Mississippi West or the 100th meridian line of lower rainfall, I believe I was right in thinking that was not getting the attention it needed. So if you looked at American history textbooks, which I did in 1992, I read over most of the existing textbooks, and it usually said, for West, see frontier. And there was no continuous attention to the West except for a phase of expansion. And that seemed like we were missing, well, what was called American history, I thought was really regional history of the East Coast. So, and you'll notice I'm doing most of this in the past tense because this is a battle that I'm not particularly fighting anymore. If something is of interest and importance and it has a Western American manifestation, I would like to have that in conversation. If we look, for instance, at rural-urban tensions, I would want Maine in there as well. I certainly wouldn't be an expert on Maine, but I would be sad if someone tried to say the people from Maine can't talk with us. So I don't patrol those borders very much, but I do make regular use, I guess I would never want to give that up, of the power of invoking Westernness. So when my book Legacy of Conquest came out in 1987, I went tooth and nail into debunking much of the Western myth. Probably debunked Shane. Then actually got to know Howie Moshevitz here in Colorado, who's a great scholar of films. And so when I did that, I had to watch Shane with a really gifted interpreter of films. And that's when I finally noticed it's so obvious. The poor hero doesn't get to stay. The poor hero has to keep saving the town and then leaving. And somehow I had an image of you should probably know that my father wrote films for Republic films, the B movies, including some pretty bad Westerns. So I probably had a genetic predisposition against Westerns. But the
I
serious
did not know that. Wow.
it's an interesting factoid. So I feel that I had a prejudice against Western imagery and evocations in cinema, which I was able to maintain because I had hardly ever looked at them. And Howie got that all screwed up because now I know that they're actually really complicated and really worth thinking about. And that the Jarretts, that horrible, terrifying family of all men, where did they come from? It's like Bonanza. There's no women in that family. Where did they come from? There's just a lot to think about in Shane and other films. That's true of everything in the set piece of now we're going to talk about the American West. As soon as you take one step into a full reckoning with that, you're really into important and interesting terrain. If you say we are only going to talk about, well, I'm not even sure I could say that. We're going to talk about boots and snap shirts. Well, Colorado, Steve Weil, uh, Rock Mount Western wear, country Western music is the source of that. So interesting. How did that happen? How did that become so popular? So I don't have any problem manipulating Western myth and symbol now for my cause. If I own 8 Rock Mount shirts. And the only thing I really liked about the lockdowns was that I was often on Zoom. I'm sorry I didn't help you out with this one, but I could use my 8 Rock Mount shirts for public appearances on Zoom. So I now have a very tangled and excellent relationship with the West. I'm still glad I'm a Western American historian. I love the fact that I predicted a renaissance in Western American studies with young scholars. I said that in the late 80s. I did not know if it was going to happen. And now it's astounding that questions that young people are asking that I would never have thought to ask. So, okay, boy, don't ever ask me another question because look what happens here. I go on and on, but I am happy to be associated with this region and happy to have this region in conversation with other parts of the nation and happy to have this region in conversation with other parts of the planet. Last remark, I did 2 courses. I taught 2 courses with the African historian and the Middle Eastern historian, comparing westward expansion to imperialism and colonialism in Africa and parts of the Middle East. So that was a wonderful chance to see things that I thought were distinctively part of Western history, but things like boarding schools for Native children. You can't really tell the curriculum in Nigeria apart from the curriculum in Montana. So, okay, that's it.
Yeah, I've heard. The reason I was asking was I've heard some very clever, flippant answers, including one scholar saying that he just took note of when people stopped wearing trucker hats and started wearing cowboy hats.
Yeah.
Where is the line? And then it's funny, you mentioned the weather, and I've heard it described as the humidity line. You know,
Yeah. Except there again, Wallace Stegner gave us that it was the past the 98th meridian. That was his, well, John Wesley Powell did a bit of that too. But then it was just confusing to deal with coastal Oregon, coastal California,
yeah,
coastal Washington, and somehow it didn't. I guess what was particularly compelling to me was hanging out in circles where I saw that the eastern United States had cooked up its own water shortages,
hmm
sometimes by pollution, sometimes just by pure overallocation. So where I should write a public apology. I told hundreds of students that the West was unique, distinct from the rest of the country in its prior appropriation and its diversion of water from one watershed to another. Well, tell that to New York City, Roman
right.
Rinse Bar. For heaven's sake, the Boston water system raids the interior and so on. So I don't know where to put my public apology for overstating the difference between prior appropriation and riparian rights in regional
Oh,
terms. But please broadcast that for me because I certainly overstated that distinction.
you would have been interested in a conversation I had last night where I was talking to a relative of a guy who makes pipes, giant 8-foot pipes. And farmers now, instead of farming their crops, they just pull their crops down and build giant pumps under their land and connect it to other private farms and then sell it to
Mm.
municipalities in Southern California. And you think, how can this be legal? Because
Yeah.
it's a trade that the cities are engaged in that is absolutely considered illegal by the state of California. And yet it goes on every single day. They do the construction at night to put it underneath the freeways, and so that people don't even know that there are these pipelines sucking the water out of the out of the aquifer where we live, and piping it to Southern California. It's just extraordinary that it's going. I mean, you think, how can this go on in the most overregulated, environmentally conscious, activist population in any place in the world, perhaps with more power in the state legislature than anywhere else, and yet it goes on to the tune of millions of acre feet of water
That's right.
uh, per year. It's extraordinary.
Are they dewatering their own farms?
Yes,
Okay,
and because it is more profitable to sell
of course. Yeah. I was,
water than it is to grow crops.
and there is a version here where they lease but retain water for farming when they in good years and lease in other years. But this is really just turning. I mean, that's the thing that I think people who go on about how just bad it is that 85% of the water, 85% of the water in Colorado and other places goes to agriculture. Well, okay, so we did that. The nation did that. Dewatering is an uglification. When you have a farmland, you have you have amber waves of grain, or you have bright green alfalfa, and you have a total landscape enrichment, whatever else the crop is going to be. And so to dewater a farmland is really uglifying and reinserting the native population. I've been at too many, I cross a lot of borders and hang out in professional circles, and I know how difficult it is to get native plants reestablished after that. So one reason to keep water in agriculture is so that we don't say, what a terrible looking place.
Yeah, it is extraordinary though that people will, as a Californian, that people will deny the building of a desalinization plant in an area that's already zoned for industrial construction, and then will instead engage in massive environmental degradation in other parts of the state, as
Right.
long as it doesn't affect their part of the state. It really is a an extraordinary thing that happens every day. Anyway, sorry to go down this tangent, but as one of the other things that I think also defines the West is they always used to say that, what is the expression? Gold was worth fighting over, water's worth killing over. Uh,
Oh, interesting. Right. And yet, this is actually something that John mentioned, that while that's the case, in some, or that applies in some circumstances, water also has historically produced a remarkable amount of cooperation and collaboration.
it's what led to the legal system. I think. I mean, again, I don't want to step in, but the land and water is what I think of sometimes. You mentioned how you thought about the West in an earlier part of your career, and I always say I spent the first part of my career, saying the incorrect things about the frontier thesis, repeating the slanders that I heard my professors say without thinking about it or reading it for myself. And I read it for myself, and I thought, oh, this is actually extraordinary. What an argument that. I mean, to me, the profound part that I missed for so many years was that he was talking about what it means to start democracy or the representative institutions of government anew.
Mm-hmm.
And when I teach it to my students, I say, well, what's the difference between someone who will remodel a house, which is what you're doing on the East Coast, versus somebody who says, okay, what if you were building this house over again? And what the rest really means is a constant rebirth and a rethinking of the meaning of America every time you would plant an entirely new community. And so you wouldn't get a remodeling of representative institutions. You would get an entire rethinking of representative institutions from start to finish. And I always thought, oh, that's really the important thing about the frontier thesis. Maybe I was an idiot to not see it initially, but I had just heard so many people make arguments like, "Oh, well, it's environmental determinism, and they have a frontier in South Africa, so frontiers don't lead to liberty." Was the shorthand version of what I was sort of unthinkingly repeating. So
Well, hmm.
go ahead.
Well, John says to challenge.
Yeah.
So I would say you're kindly underestimating how much habit, custom, assumption, practice, etc., they packed with them.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with that.
Well, right. So the reinvention and a fresh start. There's one passage in an Overland Diary that is just, I don't know, it's so funny and so touching. They have created, or many of the Overland groups did have a whole governance system place, and they are sitting in, I don't know if they're in the Wyoming, well, there's somewhere that's not a state by then, of course, but they're in a very remote place, and they're sitting around a campfire, and they're having a meeting, and they have protocol, and they have minutes, and they have this whole procedure that they are all going to discuss several propositions. And it's so funny to see these people. It's very touching to see them saying, we are going to maintain order here. And who is our chairman? Oh, there's our chairman. He will run the meeting. But that is not, I guess it's putting it in a distinct and different place, but it seems like it's replication and transport and transfer of customs, not that we start fresh.
Well,
Retort back.
no, I don't. Hopefully, I didn't mean to be misunderstood. That is the point I was trying to make, which is what happens if you take a bunch of people who have sort of values from other places and you put them in a new environment with a new set of challenges, and it's going to lead to a kind of rethinking of what these principles and what this culture is. And it's going to lead to something that is that forces us return to fundamentals because of this new environmental challenge. But I did not mean to say that it was going to result in something
totally fresh.
New. Yeah.
Of course, one does want to note but just continuing in the challenging mode, the federal government was that sponsor that, well, I'm not sure what exactly what I want to say here, but in terms of transportational structures, land systems of allocation, removal of native people, the federal government is so much the story that when we have conventional American historians telling us that the federal government rose in power in the progressive era and the New Deal and World War II, Western historians have to say, you think you want to rework that timing a little bit? The federal government was so central to every aspect of westward expansion that the Hardy, and that's not to say that it's a stroll across the continent to go on the Overland Trail. I'm certainly not saying that, but I am saying that just repeatedly the enterprise was made possible by federal support. And that's...
So I guess I'm in a different, slightly different phase in what I've been struck by lately, which is that I just keep, when I read about the interactions with the military and settlers and native peoples, that so often the settlers are lawless. And they don't listen to the army, and they don't listen to any federal government telling them where to go or what to do. And yes, it's the story of the government trying to get a handle on it, but in many cases, I mean, I was just struck by, I guess, I'm trying to think of. Brands had that book on Geronimo I read a while back, or Sherman's memoirs or Grant's memoirs, and every time I'm struck by. Oh, and actually, I just finished John Eisenhower's book on the Mexican War not too long ago too. But and each time I kept coming across these instances of settlers who are just completely lawless, and the government is just trying to come into this situation of chaos. And in many cases, just say, okay, we've got the people on the East Coast telling us to do one thing. We've got the settlers who aren't listening to us. We've got native peoples who aren't listening to us, or sometimes are. And these local commanders who are just trying to
right,
do their best with
right.
often just trying to separate people, and but also in many cases, sort of become famous, or rise in the ranks or please a superior. It's just completely chaotic and tragic and wonderful and sad, and all the
Yeah.
things that history can
Well,
be.
you're putting me out of business and challenging you, because I thought what you just said was absolutely on target. And the fact that Sherman was called an Indian lover
Yeah.
by settlers is, really, can we go over that? But
Yeah.
the caught in the middleness of the military is really striking in that story. The author of The Legacy of Conquest, which is me, said hardly a word about the military and why that happened, how that happened. I don't understand how that was me. And the book has my name on it, but that person is a figure of mystery, because how she could write a book called The Legacy of Conquest and say next to nothing about the military is like, well, that's what the ivory tower must promote in people. I mean, I have no idea what you could say about that, but it wouldn't be flattering to me. So that's been being rectified in all kinds of ways now. But the one thing that the author of The Legacy of Conquest did in recognizing the military was a pretty good paragraph or two on General John Wool in Oregon in the 1850s, who was so unpopular because he just said explicitly, we are here because of the mess the settlers made. The settlers intruded where they had no right to be, and we, the military, are here in order to deal with the chaos and wreckage that they created. And so General John Will was not popular. And he got a paragraph. He's the only person from the military who got into my book, but I'm glad I got him in. But now I'm just more and more struck about the boy, that I'll just beyond comprehension violence and brutality of a number of settlers in ways that, yes, there are some incidents with the military out of control. Yes, I got that. But boy, the settlers.
If we're busy admitting our faults, one of the other things I really blew for many years was also just underestimating the role of the Mexican government and the Mexican army in certain aspects of American Western history, and the interactions with the natives. It's just something I never thought about, and until I got a few little hints and droplets, like, oh wait, why was the Mexican government had driven them across the border? Like, I never even thought about it. And then I never thought about the size of the Mexican army and why it was, anyway. It's a good thing that we live long enough to
Right.
realize how wrong we were when we were
Right.
young.
Not that greatest skill among academics of saying, whoops.
Yeah.
Well, we're doing a good job of it today.
Right.
So, professors, we are 40 minutes in, and we
Oh,
haven't gotten directly to any of my topics, which are fine.
that's
Um, but I do think we should at least touch on some of them, if you don't mind. And keep in mind, I always remind Professor Tootle about this, Professor Limerick, that there's a role for a historian that's different than me. I'm a political science degree and a law degree, and I've been active in campaigns and public policy issues for 40 years. But I'm not a historian. And so, why do I interview a historian for over 100 shows now? It's because I think there's some value to have a longer term perspective, or a different view than I might have. I might have differing warring tribes that are battling each other in contemporary politics, but not think about previous tribes and teams that were warring or collaborating. So there's some value in a historian, or I wouldn't be doing this show. So keep that in mind, that you are a historian. Let's go to a broader touch of what it means to be an American, because I'm not sure if we were to ask 100 Americans, I'm not sure we'd be particularly pleased with most of those answers. Do we even have a national consensus on what it means to be an American? And I'm talking now, I'm talking Israel, Gaza, Hezbollah. I'm talking Putin and Ukraine. I'm talking Hong Kong and Taiwan and China. What role do we have as Americans in the world? And we can have a Western flair, since that's your area of expertise. But does it mean anything to be an American, or what is the role of America in the world right now? And I'm looking for some disagreement between you and Professor Tootle. Say whatever you wish to say.
okay. I will say first that as an historian, I have tried unrelentingly to do it's never been easy on the planet. It's never been well, now we're having quite a group hug and it's going on for a century or two. No. So perspective, though, that comes in the form in which I have been doing it, I did it for quite a while apologetically, which is to say, oh my goodness, we have quite a lot of tensions and divisions in the nation today, some of them involving foreign policy, but some of them involving you name it. Oh, well, I would have to tell you that the 1850s were worse. And they were, I think. I think.
Solid ground there. Yeah, I'd say.
I think that's pretty solid ground. And that horrible Preston Brooks,
Yeah.
Senator Sumner with a gutta percha cane, that was really bad. And so I was hanging out with that as my response of, well, you see, there were some very terrible things that happened. And then there was a war. And then there was an actual civil war. And so you can't really alarm me too much with we're sort of at each other's throats here because, or talk to Indian people. When we get that little routine about how the United States has been so fortunate not to have a war on its own territory. Well, how many engagements or battles or whatever happened between Indian people and white people with suffering on both sides and so on this turf. So anyway, so I can really do that. Look how good I am at this. You think it's bad now. Well, boy, I can tell you it's really bad other times. Nostalgia. I run into people every now and then. Oh, I would have liked to have been around in the Old West. I think, oh, into cholera, are you? Huh? It's interesting. Not that many people are sentimental about that. So it takes such a soft focus lens to say how, well, I won't go into the details of cholera, but it's not an occasion for nostalgia. So sometimes I think that is my job as historian, is to be on nostalgia immunization patrol. And to just be there with the dose that says, oh, you think it's bad now? Well, let me tell you about what it was like now. And this is where I'm going to say, I still would do that. I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to say, one thing that we do when we distort history is we overstate either or categories. And we note, for instance, if I say Indian white war, I am totally erasing the Indian people who fought on the side of the army. Custer Crow people died with Custer, Little Bighorn, on his side. So anytime you say an either or, oh, Indians or whites, Indians against whites, you should really, at least temporarily, turn in your license as an historian, because you are really, hopefully you will get it back. But you cannot do that kind of simplification without really filing. We don't have an oath of office, so we can't violate that, but we should be punished for doing that, I think. So I can do all that. And then I am consuming the incoming news, the things that you mentioned, all of the international crises, and the United States, often its leadership floundering and for quite a long spell, in responding to that, and the divisiveness and the rage and the coming up to the edge of violence, of expression of dissent, and then going over the edge of violence. I just think I'm not really getting that much consolation from my usual little routine of consolation. I'm about to hand off to somebody who's, please do better than I can do on this one, Professor Tootle, because I can get to the, yes, it was terrible and by some measures worse in the past. What is that supposed to do for us? When the historian plays that card, is that supposed to be, so don't empathize with human suffering in different communities in the Middle East? That surely is. So I can do the consolation routine, and it's not working particularly for the consoler.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry if that to interrupt if I cut you
No,
off.
no, please, no. I want you to care. I took it as far as I took it, and I took it to a muddle. And
so there are two things that I'm concerned with because I begin with the premise that America was founded as an ideological nation state, and I worry about the loss of faith in and I mean this in the nicest way, elite institutions, in particular in political and media institutions and educational institutions. And then further, to take it to the next step that you might want to comment on. I worry about the role that my own profession has played in undermining
Yeah.
political, media, and educational institutions by doing precisely the thing you said that we shouldn't do, which is by rewarding people who engage in the kind of either or questions
Yeah.
at the professional level.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know if I want to get too far into this, but I left Colorado for a reason. You know, that and just to be, maybe blunt and broad at the same time, there was a fight going on between leftists who were trying to throw out all of the liberals, and I didn't want to be a part of that fight because I and uh, and I it made me leave the profession.
Mhm.
Uh, you know,
But you're, Professor, just for making sure I understand, leftists that were attacking liberals,
liberal.
not conservatives, liberals.
Well, there were no conservative. I mean, they had never seen a conservative, but it was,
Well,
so nobody ever thought I was a conservative because it never occurred to them that I could have been.
ah,
At that time, if you were a conservative, you treated it like you were a closeted homosexual. I mean, until you got
ah,
tenure, you kept your mouth shut about everything. But I had people coming into my office and saying that criticizing the books on my shelf because they said I had too many books about presidents and diplomats, and and they wanted to know if I was a liberal, and I said, oh, no, I'm not. But they never suspected that I was a conservative. But at the same time, they were just running the liberals out of the profession and making sure that they didn't hire any new ones. And I wonder, and it was, precisely the kind of behavior that I would have wanted to discourage, I felt was being encouraged. We want to hire these highly politicized people who are going to put people into, they're going to give things a name, give it a category, say it's good, and then we're going to promote those people as quickly as possible and give them the power to crush all dissent, was the general thrust of the profession, I felt, in the sort of 90s and 2000s. And it soured me on many parts of what you would, I mean, I just sort of began seeking what I would almost call alternative institutions almost immediately from the time I was in grad school. So I never even thought about submitting to a conventional history journal.
so Professor, help me focus us for a
Yeah,
second.
sorry. I just, she knows what I'm
Broadly,
talking about.
being American now,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
roll
So I would say for the purpose of defining what it means to be an American, uh, I would say as a country that was founded as an ideological state, um, it's a problem if the only thing that holds us together are ideas and nobody knows what they are.
out.
And historians have a special role to play in an ideological nation state that maybe makes history more important in the United States than it is in countries that are based on, all of the stuff that blood and soil and borders and all of the things that I find offensive. But so if I don't know, we run with that in any direction you want, the state of the profession or our role in it, or
Right.
And if I could add, Professor Limerick, do you concur in the context of Professor Tootle's American exceptionalism in his definition of it? Does that resonate with you, or would you describe America in a different type of way?
That's a very good question and a hard one. I am entirely in tune with the how difficult it is to live up to ideals proposition, since I have experienced some of that in my own conduct and have seen it in hundreds of thousands of other people. So I do think that I believe to the core of my soul, that this nation started with ideals in writing that are worth our loyalty and affiliation. And I also believe that those ideals, like ideals in human hands in every era I can think of, or every locale I can think of, ideals really have a rough run of it. Because if you try to put them into practice, they are going to turn out to be full of complications and sacrifices that you didn't expect and so on. So I feel that I am on the right track in life, which very few people seem to want to join me in thinking we will respect the ideals and we will honor our obligation to look at the failure of those ideals. So here is a phrase that the phrase everyone has heard the phrase billions of times: America, my country, right or wrong, my country. And I am realizing I want a movement which may exist, and I just don't know where it is. My country, right and wrong, my country. I don't seem to have any members of my movement, but I think it's pretty good, because it seems like without that, all we have is speaking of either or. We either have that we are going to celebrate the ideals and express our dismay of the people who are saying those ideals are compromised, or we're going to accent how compromised those ideals are and excoriate the people who think that the ideals are standing on their own or deserving of respect that they don't receive when we look at how they have failed in practice.
Yeah, I always liked the way that Calvin Coolidge put it, of all people, when he was describing how he learned it from his history professor. But that essentially every act of telling the truth in context is an act of patriotism, because we believe that our ideals are actually correct. And as long as, if we actually believe what we're saying, then we should never fear the truth. Every act of truth telling in context is an act of patriotism if you actually believe that your ideals are true and a reflection of human nature. And, you know, as Americans, we should believe that human nature is flawed and that we are going to mess this up. And therefore, no one gets to be a dictator or a king or a national daddy who tells us what to do, because he would do a lot of, or she would do a lot of bad things.
Right. And well, the comicalness of your quoting, well, having that come from Calvin Coolidge, that's its own spectacular reminder that pure judgments that rest on purity, this person is purely admirable or this person is purely contemptible, we would lose a wonderful quotation from Calvin Coolidge if we did that, because we don't really, our pulses don't race with inspiration and admiration when we think of him, but he played a good card there. He pulled one off. So that notion
Professor Limerick, would you find it shocking that Professor Tootle thinks that Calvin Coolidge is one of the great American heroes?
The word, my only word is shocking. That's the only word I can say. Yes.
Contemptible.
I would say, okay, so remember the part that when we started about how I would go to dinner parties and everybody said the same thing and I was perishing of boredom?
Yeah.
So I would say, well, next thing you know, he's going to say Warren Harding. How do we, I mean, it's really, that's kind of
Warren Harding. Yeah.
I wrote a play in college about Warren Harding, which I must share with you at some point.
Yeah.
You love those people. Okay, so I guess I find that something that I didn't expect anyone to say. I'm going to quote Warren Harding, who said at one point in his presidency, "This is a hell of a place for a man like me to be."
Yeah.
Quite a hardened scholar. This is a treacherous.
I would heavily qualify my love of Warren Harding. I don't know if I would quite put him in the you know, statesmanship category. I just mean, I think that Coolidge was one of the politicians who thought more and thought deeply about the meaning of the American experience in ways that I'm nostalgic for. Because he was so intense in his focus in thinking about the meaning of every level of government, and I just found that that extraordinary in a practical politician who held, you know, every office a politician could hold. You know,
and in the profession. So I'm going to just say that in the last few days, I've had to be saying to anyone who would like to hear me say it, that speaking of nostalgia, the higher education that I thought I had entered, that doesn't exist. So,
Yeah.
and it's not going to come back. And it may not have ever existed. But I think that I went to college in obviously much shouting. I started college in 1968, University of California, Santa Cruz, brand new college. The founder of our residential college, the Cowell College within that, was a 10th Mountain Division veteran
Oh.
and a person of astounding character and integrity. The slogan he has to have been the person who picked it, he was the founder. As we walked into the college, anytime we walked in there, it said, "The pursuit of truth in the company of friends," was our slogan. And our leader, Paige Smith, noted American historian, did not spend a lot of time. Well, he was a lieutenant. I'm sure he was a very good officer. And so he knew that ordering, he did so fun. He wrote a letter. The college was founded in 1965. The hippie thing starts in right there. So Paige Smith, who would laughed and laughed and laughed about this all the rest of his life, but he didn't know what to make of this. It's 1965, 1966. The students they're barefoot, their hair is gone. And so he wrote a provost letter to my students saying, "What is happening to you? Why are you doing all this? And bring it back and be people of order." And to his horror over the years, it turns out Reader's Digest got that and reprinted it. And it was a rallying point for everyone who was resisting change. And Page was not resisting change. He just thought it would be nice if we went to dinner in the college dining hall and looked like we had some respect for each other and maybe even for the dining staff. And so it was so funny that he became this great holder of a banner, which was not a banner he particularly wanted to hold. So anyway, so I started college, and I won't go any further with that, except that it was in almost every day the pursuit of truth in the company of friends. I have stationery. It looks like I'm the CEO of a company called the Pursuit of Truth in the Company of Friends, Patricia Nelson Limerick. So I went into higher education thinking, I want to be there. Then, again, I don't know how much I was failing to gauge reality back then, because it was protest time, 1968 to 1972 college. That was a time of peace and equity and equanimity. No, I don't think so. But it did seem like we were licensed and permitted to be in each other's company. And if one of us said, "I am the biggest fan of Calvin Coolidge," we would have said, initially, that makes no sense to us, but what is it that we didn't know about Calvin Coolidge? So just really slow process. How did I take so long to get disillusioned? How come my illusions were so strong? But I would say now, I've just, maybe this week even, I have just started saying the form of higher education that I fell in love with, that I wanted to be a part of, it's gone and it's not coming back.
Ooh, not coming back. That's strong.
You know, in light of that, what Professor Limerick just said, I've got a question for, I guess, all three of you. And you can take it wherever way, you know, whatever way you want. I was actually, John has kind of assigned me the role, since I'm a lawyer, of figuring out interesting court cases, you know, and talking about them. I'm not going to do that, at least in depth today, because you guys are having a great conversation. I don't want to sidetrack it. But the case I was going to talk about is a First Amendment case that was decided actually earlier this week. It's not a U.S. Supreme Court case, anything like that, although some people think it's on its way there. Personally, I don't think it is. But basically what had happened in that case was this kid wanted to wear a T-shirt that said there were only two genders, and the school wouldn't let him wear it.
Right.
So to make a long story short, he puts the T-shirt on and he puts tape over where it said two genders, and he said censored. And then he wore that T-shirt to school. Well, they wouldn't let him wear that. And, you know, to make a longer story short, the court said, oh, it's okay for the school to have a policy that the kid couldn't wear that T-shirt. You know, but my point in bringing this up is it seems right now in our society, we are deliberately trying to hurt each other in one way or another, not physically and not just with words. We're doing things that are intended to make other people just kind of revile in horror about something either we do, we say, or we display.
Yeah.
How do we get, for lack of a better way to put it, how do we get away from that? Like with this court case, my personal opinion of that court case is, okay, this is really silly. If a kid wants to wear a t-shirt, I don't care what the t-shirt says, whatever, wear it. But I think everybody else needs to kind of go, well, okay, the kid's got a t-shirt on and it says this. That makes me uncomfortable. It's kind of interesting that that person thinks that way.
Right.
You either talk to that person or you don't.
Right.
We don't have to bar the person from expressing themselves, but it seems like all of our boundaries have just kind of disintegrated. What do we do about this?
In every institution.
Yeah, in a lot of institutions, probably not all of them, but
Right. I'm going to go in a mild-mannered way, while completely agreeing with the proposition that I don't recall learning anything that was worth learning without feeling some discomfort as I learned it.
Exactly.
And if I had been, if some hovering force, chancellor or provost had rushed in and pulled me out of the path of discomfort, I would be an amazingly stupid person at this stage. I mean, we would weep for me at that stage, because I would be I just never have had a chance to learn anything without the discomfort. Not that I haven't learned a few things from comfortable circumstances. Those happen. I'm not sure they last as long, though. I'm not sure that when you have just gone to a delightful conversation and thought, oh my gosh, I never thought of that, and the dinner was so tasty and the beverages were a treat, I'm not sure that that's going to last for you. But oh boy, was that a tough moment for me. So I will now say that the mild-mannered comment I will make is that we have lost the capacity to clear things up. So let's say I made a mocking, I don't know why I would do this, but if I made a mocking remark about John's mustache, that this is frequently worn by villains, and I don't know, I've never thought of it as that, but
better than a villain.
Yeah.
Right? But why a person who I do not think of as a villain would want to be seen as a villain? If I said that, and if John, oh, this is too funny, but if John proved to be very fragile, really, really fragile, and was very hurt by my saying that, really hurt, and everyone else could sense and knew that he was really hurt, then I would want to be able to clear that up. I would want to be able to say, oh, you see, my father wrote these B movies for Republic, and so comical portrayals of villains. My father said that every film, and they did it, Republic for a Phase, had to have the line, "You stupid blighter, look what you've done." And so, my father, well, my father was speaking through me there for a moment. He'd come back, and I was making remarks about mustaches and films, and I certainly did not mean to injure John. I did not mean to do that. And so let's just blame it on my father, who has passed away, and then we'll move on, and I won't do that again. So the possibility that you could step in it and then be given a chance to decide whether, if I said, I really wanted to injure John, don't get in my way, then you could say, maybe we'll spend less time with her in the future, but I could then go off, I could stalk off, and I could do that if I wanted to. But the fact that there just doesn't seem to be any way for someone to say, can we go back over what happened, what my intention was, what you thought I meant, what I actually meant? Could we just it'll take much less time than locking into this.
A lawsuit.
Well, don't you think? Yeah, exactly. So I hope that's not a complete, I mean, I have no idea what to do about the fragility, and I find it hilarious that conservatives picked up the victim stance. That, I mean, that's funny, that notion that people of different ethnicities or genders or whatever were playing the victim thing. I think that was interfering with the chance to experience discomfort and learn. I wouldn't have recommended that to them. But to see conservatives getting all fragile and taking things as cuts to the core, when it's really just like, well, I mean, that stupid line from, I assume, everyone's childhood, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names or words will never hurt me. Well, that would be pleasant. I guess that doesn't really make sense for human nature, that words can be very wounding and so on. But the notion that you couldn't, oh, I have a really funny story that I hope I'll shut me up at this point, but I was walking down the street here about 2 weeks ago. A fire truck was pulled up at the corner waiting to turn left. There wasn't a light and the traffic was kind of heavy. The two guys sitting closest to the side there, open air, more or less. I just thought how I had the right of way. I could walk in front of the fire truck and I would have the right of way. But they were impatient. They weren't on a call. They weren't on a call, but they would be impatient. And it just struck me suddenly as so funny that if I were to be run over by the fire truck, that would be great because three or four people who really would know how to help me would just be on it. The fire truck would hit me. I would be bleeding. I guess I'd be bleeding. And these people, very capable, very ready to roll people, would be right there and would take care of me. So it just struck me as really funny that being run over by a fire truck would be especially when not on a call, would be really a great thing. I haven't been able to explain that funny thing to anyone. You seem to be getting it with me, but it's really, really funny. So to have that recognition that you could do an injury, the driver wouldn't have done it on purpose, but if something happened, he was just impatient, wasn't seeing that I was coming out of his line of vision or whatever, that he could take instant remedy to that. That gets me back to what John said about us being historians. I want historians to be EMTs in society today. I want us to be not maybe first responder. We could get in the way, don't want to do that. The second responder. So just as a crisis, a conflict, a dilemma erupts, there is an instant summoning of a historian trained in clear, diplomatic, and forceful communication. So EMT, right in there. I used to say, well, I won't go there exactly, but well, we would be armed with our wits is what we would have, and we wouldn't be set for any other kind of intervention besides that. But couldn't that happen? Couldn't that actually be the case that historians could be mobilized to move in?
It would be a substitute for what we currently have, which is lawyers going in and
Yeah.
arguing. Yeah, it'd be a nice substitute.
I have
Professor, react to that?
Yeah, for years, actually in the 2000s, I used to write for the History News Network and that was kind of their dream, was that historians would be responding to, applying history to current events in many cases. But one of the things that I experienced once, it had nothing to do with my work as a historian, but when I was involved in politics, I had all of these instances where people would stick a microphone in my face and they wanted me to say something because they had already written their story. They were just looking for the quote. And the fact that I wouldn't say the magic words that I was supposed to say, meant that they weren't coming back to me. And I realized we have I guess, a problem with the media as well, in that they've already written their story. Now they go out looking for sources. And I tell my students that this is one of the things I need to break you of, is the idea that somebody taught you that how we approach questions is isn't it possible that this happened? And then the way we study something is we consider it to be fair and balanced if we say, should Truman have dropped the atomic bomb? Here are the pros and here are the cons. And then that somewhere we're being balanced. And I say, we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Before we do any of that stuff, tell me what happened. And what we're going to find is if you start with evidence first, you're going to find out that somebody's asking the wrong question, and that there's a maybe deeper and more interesting question that you would come up with to realize that somebody else is putting all of this information into the wrong concepts, the wrong categories, or to use your expression, a sort of either or. And courts, I think, have in some ways answered some of these free speech issues by saying, listen, free speech is protected, but harassment is not. So you are allowed to, express yourself but you're not allowed to harass other students. If you're not allowed to target other people. And it reminds me that in so many areas of life that common sense and goodwill are necessary in a culture because and that's you have to have a sort of strength of character in your institutions in order to have a culture of common sense and goodwill in order to understand, look, we all know what's going on here. Knock it off. You're targeting this person. Leave him alone. You get to do your work, and we're not going to allow this to be a knockdown, drag out fight. And I think there have been a couple of positive examples, but I don't want to overstate it. I was listening to an interview with Ben Sass yesterday where he was talking about what the University of Florida did with all of these protests. And he said, well, we found that if we, I'm paraphrasing from a long interview, but he kind of said what we insisted upon was like following the rules and civility. And we found that that solved most of the problem. That if you would like to espouse a viewpoint, that's fine. You can go, you can protest, but you're not allowed to camp here. You're not allowed to take over buildings. We all have to follow the same state laws. And what you find is that how many people really are interested in discussing ideas? Very few. Like it turns out that the protest went down to about 25 people once you said, no, you have to discuss ideas or you have to not engage in illegal behavior. And I'm all for protecting the free speech rights of those dedicated 25 people who I may disagree with, but and that's essentially what I've seen on successful college campuses, but that takes a certain amount of strength because the easier thing to do is to give in and say, because for everybody, we all have jobs and we don't want to be fired and we have mortgages and, kids we need to put through college or whatever, and it's a disruption to our lives to be singled out for attack by a mob, and no one wants it, and yet that's the power of the bully or the terrorist or of anybody else who will
right.
sort of threaten a livelihood in order to achieve a political goal. So I guess my final thing is there is also I wanted to mention the Streisand effect. Have you guys ever heard of the Streisand effect?
Barbara Streisand effect?
Yeah, Barbara Streisand. You don't know this story?
May have been affected, but I didn't know.
Yeah, so the Streisand effect was that she wanted to be left alone. And so she made a big deal about having her home not photographed, which ended up in her home being photographed a lot more than it ever would have if she had ever complained about it. And in many cases, I think what Ben Sass's leadership at the University of Florida might be demonstrating is that if you just sort of don't give these people more attention, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this in the classroom, but I always describe it as, every now and then you have a sort of troublemaker in class, and I've always found it's just easier to ride the wave. Rather than single them out and have a big fight about it, like just say, okay, that's an interesting point. Now let me ask you 3 questions to clarify. And you realize well, you, in many cases, you don't know what you're talking about, but, and then I'll say, okay, well, investigate these 3 questions and come back tomorrow. And then they won't because they're not actually interested in learning. But if I were to, try to bully them back or, crush them under my thumb or something, that's giving them what they want. And instead, I've found that just being sincere and trying to engage people sincerely is far more effective.
So, Professor Doodle, we've gone from a high level again down to very practical daily life. Professor, with your permission, Professor Limerick, do you have a reaction to any of that the last 5 or so minutes? Would you like to?
I would say, and I do want to go back to this or just say, I don't think the higher education as I loved it and wanted to be part of, I don't think it's coming back. I will stand by that remark, I'm afraid, because it seems so obvious that a leader, a campus leader who speaks well, who seems to be acquainted with principles, who seems to be trying to live those principles, who has a sense of humor, who enjoys the company of people. So I remember clearly in Santa Cruz in 1970, 1968, one of our professors, who was actually second in command in our residential college, he came and walked around. We were protesting and shutting down a campus entrance. He just walked around with me, talked with me through that. That was really nice. And
Yeah.
not that I was planning anything that was going to be disruptive, but I remember that so pleasantly. And I remember that he saved me from almost being run over by a delivery truck. The driver was really mad and was gunning it up, and the professor knocked me out of the way.
Not
So
a fire truck, though.
Yeah, the delivery truck probably could have helped you.
Yeah.
He probably
Yeah.
could have just delivered you to the morgue.
Yeah.
Right, well, that's right. That's exactly right. So I don't think we have leaders, very many leaders like that now. Ben Sass, PhD, Yale, just going to say history there. So what can we do there? We have to accept and acknowledge that. So, but I also feel like when the Center of the American West lived and thrived, when I had somebody in an audience on campus, but shouting and disrupting and so on, I almost always prevailed by saying, wait. I'm going to interrupt you. You have something you feel very strongly about. I totally get that. We get that. We can't understand exactly what you're saying, the intensity of your thoughts and emotions right now. So I'm going to leave you for a minute. I'm coming back in 8 minutes, and I'm going to ask you to give this another try because we really want to hear it, but
Right.
we're just not getting it from you just yet. So, and that was amazing how much that worked. I also did the "I'll meet you for lunch tomorrow" routine.
Yeah.
And so that went extremely well. And it wasn't rocket science to figure that out. That I did not have to go through intensive trainings on group relations or to do that. I just,
Right.
well, I'm a little bit curious about what got into him. I'd like to do that. But I could say, meanwhile, we have 8 people who have their hands up to ask questions. And so I'm coming back to you. You're in the queue, but I need to come back because I'm not getting it just yet. So those things are so simple. And we seem to have this group of people who, I'm not going to say they were raised by coyotes outside Banning, California in the desert. I'm not going to say that, but, and it wouldn't be the coyotes' fault really, because they were doing the best they could if the coyotes were raising these folks, but they seem not to have some just very elemental thoughts about what it means to come into an agitated situation and convey tranquility and a desire for the best outcome for everyone. And sometimes I had 2 or 3 times I did have to have security take somebody out from a gathering. And when I did, as they were going out the door, I would say, remember, I have offered you lunch tomorrow. So goodbye. Now,
Yeah.
please don't be a stranger. That great line that either the South or the West owns. Don't be a stranger. I could say that as the protester was being taken out. So that again is so simple-minded. And occasionally well, see, that's why I'm just thinking it's not coming back, because now you require so much consent and willingness from everyone in the picture to do that.
This is something we charged Bart with also, because I've been thinking about how we would craft a state law in order to create an environment where essentially the values of what we might call old liberalism would be allowed to exist in higher education again. And how would this look if we were to avoid, it shouldn't be affirmative action for conservatives. It should simply be, what would it actually look like as a state law that simply said, you can't ideologically discriminate against people who simply believe in pluralism. And if you have managed on your faculty to have 100% of your faculty be people who don't believe in pluralism, that should be made illegal because you're engaging in a kind of systematic discrimination against pluralists.
Right.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts or want to contribute to.
Well, I do because I obviously am not I'm not at all enthusiastic about orthodoxy. And I have always had a deep allergy to orthodoxy. And I believe my teachers in Banning would
Yeah.
testify that I have always had an allergy to orthodoxy.
Right.
And I may be more fair-minded than a lot of other people in finding orthodoxy from the left as repellent as orthodoxy from the right. And I would not be able to rank order my repulsions from not repulsion. That's not to my, oh, good Lord, do we have to waste our time on that? Feelings about both of those. And I don't know if I could gauge which is more complicit in and enthusiastic about the enforcement of orthodoxy. So at the risk of jeopardizing everyone, I will say one thing that happened was that I, for years, I was part of the founding of the Benson Center for Western Civilization here, the conservative outpost on campus. I took part in the discussions that led to it. I was a founding member of the board. I had a standing it was pretty fun. I had the standing as the only advisory board member who didn't have a term limit. That's how venerable I was. And really, I had taken whatever I needed to take from people telling me not to support causes that were not things they thought I should support. So then, boo-hoo, in the climate of our times, I lost my permanent no term limits position.
Yeah.
I got removed from the board. I thought, oh, so I don't know what to make of that. Maybe I have no idea what that would be. Maybe the fact that my parents voted for Democrats came out and that was used against me. I mean, that's a joke. That's a joke, total joke. But I don't know why I was taken out of that position. But it's one of those things where I think, well, I don't think that's in the interest of the causes that we're supporting here. But it's just omnipresent. The orthodoxy thing is, I don't understand, again, because back to me at the dinner parties, the boredom from having everyone say what you were already thinking. I mean, what a joy to have heard a positive remark about Calvin Coolidge. What a stimulus I would never have had in life. And other people my age have to do crossword puzzles to keep their minds nimble. I don't have to do that. I just have friends and new friends who tell me things that Calvin Coolidge said that I never knew. And then I don't have to do crossword puzzles to keep nimble. So great
I think
relief.
our careers might have been somewhat parallel in a sense because I was also somebody who rejected the orthodoxy, but the orthodoxy what I was growing up with was the all the teachers and the professors and they all agreed with one another, and I was the punk rock kid saying, "How can you guys claim to be the radicals when you all agree with one another?" Like
Right,
this is.
right,
Uh,
right.
and
I
I,
guess how people perceive themselves when they are in that. I mean, I could see someone coming down with intense fatigue over how humans conduct themselves and express themselves, just saying, I am not going to think anymore. I'm just not. I'm
yeah.
doing it and it's been exhausting and it's not paying off in any way I can see. So if I have thoughts, I shall keep them to myself because I can see somebody doing that, but I cannot see the voluntary, I am just going to decommission half of the available neurons.
Do you
So,
think
Professor,
I've got a really wild question I want to ask her because when you said the word neurons, this just sparked something in me. I
Well,
found that I am mentally healthier when I'm engaged in doing historical work.
oh,
And I think that and I sort of have a half of an idea here. I wonder if one of the things that makes us happy as a human being is every time I read another page of a document, every time I turn the page of another book, I am admitting my own ignorance. I am
mhm.
saying, wow, I didn't know that.
Oh,
Now I
totally.
do. And wow, I can't believe how wrong I was about this. And you're gaining humility with every
Yeah,
word that your
yeah,
eyes pass across.
yeah,
And I find that then when I'm struggling to put those things together in a coherent sort of narrative, um, that also makes me more humble. And somehow these two
yeah.
acts of profound humility are mentally good for me. And I
Yeah.
wonder if by um, having so many people reject the very idea that you have to do work, that content knowledge is important. The people who say, I don't need to know anything. Why do I need to know anything? And schools should, I mean, I don't know if you'll find this shocking, but the college where I teach took learning out of the college mission statement, and no one noticed except for me. And I said, "Oh my God, wait." And they said, "Oh, well, that's okay. It doesn't matter." And I thought, what? How can a college? I,
Wow.
I think most people would, in I think your reaction is the reaction that many people should have had in my community, but they're like, well, who cares about learning? What we do is we expose people to education and then we award them degrees. And I said, you took out the part where the students had to do something. And
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
requiring learning
Yeah.
is actually against the mission of the college.
Right.
So,
Well,
and this is going to make people sad, because the thing that makes people happy is engaging in constructive work with their minds.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, I quite agree that I have a friend who's actually very visible and nationally on this, but our plan is to have a 3H program, which is humility, humor, and humanity.
Oh, I love it.
And we're not going anywhere without the humor part. I'm not going to go near that without that. So the 3H's, well, okay, you notice I've had several movements. I've had the My Country Right and Wrong movement, yeah. Several of them. And I only have, well, at least with this one, the humility, humor, and humanity, I do have another member of the group. So that's pretty good. I've doubled the membership there, and maybe I will triple it or quadruple it now.
Yeah.
So,
and you know who else is a person of good humor who agrees with a lot of people I find offensive is Steve Hayward. I don't know if you know him, but
I love him. Yeah. He was here back when I was an honored and accepted and tolerated member of the Benson Center. He was here for that. So yeah, back in my glory.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine, and his position has been, I stick, some of my friends say this, some of my friends say that, I'm sticking with my friends. And I thought, well, that's a lovely way to go through life.
Yeah, he does. And in terms of the way the history thing keeps us, you'd think would keep us humble, is that the people of the past are so cagey and evasive and elusive and letting us know as much as we want to know. So we are always in the, oh shoot, that courthouse burned down and the next year's files are gone, and come back, people of the past, come back and don't be hiding from us. But they keep doing that. And so we always are piecing together clues. And if we ever make a statement with 100% certainty, we should just be taken outside and a bucket of water or something should be dumped on us at that moment, because we'll get over it. But the notion that you ever think you've got something utterly figured out in history is just, nope.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I always say all we do is and this is something I got from one of my old professors who wrote a book called The Degradation of American History. His name was Craig Harlan. We went by David Harlan. And that book was like sort of an attack on the professionalism movement of the 90s. But, if I were to sum up what that book really comes down to, is something he used to say in private all the time. He's like, we just run it up the flagpole and see who salutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we're going to do our best, but he says we should do our best out of love. There was a chapter in the book called Love and Obligation, which is that historians don't act out of professionalism. We act out of love and obligation. And that's not something we should run away from. But he said, ultimately, we're wanting to get it right because of what we love and what we want to build. And then, how he summarized that in private was, and then we just have to run it up the flagpole and see who salutes.
Well, professors, I knew this would be an intriguing and insightful conversation today. You did not disappoint, either one of you. Alas, it's 30 seconds till 11, and that's gone our full measure of time and beyond. Perhaps we can do this again. I had 3 or 4 other topics. We didn't talk about gays and abortion and guns and
okay.
And violence. I wanted to talk about violence and why our society is going off the deep end, certain members across the spectrum. Well, we didn't even get to any of that. But this was an enjoyable and useful part of my life. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for this meeting.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Ponder another time.
Yes, or
Absolutely.
break our hearts. You could not do it again, and then that would just break our hearts. So
Yeah.
always an option to do that. But that was wonderful.
Lovely.
What a pleasure. Really a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Patty, Stephen, professors, great day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.